Thrive and Be Whole. My name is Ayana, and I am your health and wellness coach. I'm so excited to come to you today with this video about self love, especially if you are a person of color. And before we jump into that, I just want to give a little bit more info about what it is that I do with Thrive and Be Whole. So, Thrive and Be Whole is my other baby. I have uh, three kids total, and Thrive and Be Whole would be, I guess, my fourth. So I am a health and wellness coach. I'm certified, and what I do is I support people who want to feel better and look better, and it all starts from the inside out. So, what we're going to talk about today is our self love tips. I support people with health and nutrition, but I also support people with self love and work life balance as well. So, today, I think one of the things that gets in the way of us accomplishing our goals is us not feeling like we are valuable or having or loving ourselves enough or feeling worthy. And sometimes those things can come from a much deeper place than we think. And so it took me being an adult to realize for myself how me being a person of color was impacting how I felt about myself, and specifically being a Black woman in the United States. So when I grew up as a Black woman, I'll just give you a little background about myself. Grew up living in Black neighborhoods, but going to white schools. I got a scholarship, partial scholarship to go to private schools when I was young, and that always impacted the way that I felt about myself. When you're in a white school and you're surrounded by white people, you start you start to adopt a white beauty standard yourself. And obviously, as a Black woman, I did not fit into that standard. Now, it wasn't just me, though, having to be in a white school. It was also me watching, turning on the TV, going to movies, growing up with the princesses and watching and seeing how they're all or mostly white. Images that I saw of Black women were Black women who had straight hair or lighter skinned women. And so I felt like I didn't fit into that mold or into that box. And as a result, I grew up kind of like feeling uncomfortable in my own skin and like I wasn't worthy. And when I was a kid, I remember very distinctly wanting to have lighter skin, wanting my hair to be straight, wanting my hair or curly, wishing that I could be a mixed race child so I could feel more beautiful and feel feeling envious of girls around me who had those traits and those characteristics. I actually remember several incidents growing up when there was a white boy that I had a crush on in school, and I remember him telling a friend that I would have been prettier if I were white. And then there were also examples too of young Black boys and young boys of color who would always say that they had a preference for lighter skinned women. So we're going to talk about that today because there are those important self-esteem issues that impact people of color specifically. And here are some tips for how you can work on yourself and find self-love in that kind of hostile territory, in the hostile space that we live in. Because here's the important thing. It is not just a preference. That's the spoiler alert today, is that it is not just a preference. There are deeper things at play here. And if you can remind yourself of these things, and you can work to find self-love for yourself as a person of color. Okay, so we're going to unpack those things one by one. Okay, so here is the first thing you have to remember. The first thing you have to remember is that you are not crazy, okay? You are not crazy, that you were taught to hate yourself. If you are a person of color on this planet, really be mindful of that because what was most destructive and difficult for me is growing up in this day and age where we feel like we're very liberal, we feel like we've moved on from race. A lot of people, at least in the past couple years in American society would say that we're post-racial and racism's gone, and why are people of color tripping so much? Well, you're not tripping. You were taught to hate yourself, okay? And that's very, very important. And so the only way that we can properly move on is if we really address the past and we can grow and develop from it. So it's not an innocent preference for white beauty standards, okay? It's not just, oh, I have a preference for lighter skin, or I have a preference for for blonde hair and blue eyes. All of that was taught to all of us as people of color. So I just want to pull up one statistic real quickly that'll help shape this conversation. Okay. Because European beauty standards were wide and far reaching. So in 1900, 90.4% of Africa was colonized by Europeans. 90.4%. 98.9% of Polynesia. 56.5% of Asia was colonized. 100% of Australia was colonized. And 27.2% of the Americas, that's of the entire of both continents, was colonized. So as you can see, European and white culture and beauty standards were far reaching, okay? And that was only in 1900. So those numbers went up and down and definitely fluctuated. But that means that there were no corners of the globe that were untouched by Europeans in 1900, okay? So with the majority of the planet being colonized by white Europeans, it makes logical sense that the white beauty standard would be what was so accepted universally. So we were all taught that white was superior. If you went to schools, if you were fortunate enough to go to schools, but if you went to schools, or even if you didn't go to schools at that time or for centuries, it was explicitly taught that white was superior in intellect, in appearance, in abilities. We know that science back in the day really broke down skull size and different and measured the lengths of different features of different races to prove who was superior and who wasn't, analyzing different body parts to prove supposedly superiority. So when you're growing up with that level of influence, that's something that's was taught to us for centuries. So it's going to take a long time for we as a society and for we as a planet to undo all of that brainwashing. And we were all taught that the only way to be better human beings was to try to change our appearance and be lighter. Okay, so lighten our skin. We know that skin bleaching creams are like a top selling beauty product around the globe. I put beauty product in quotes because I don't think it's a beauty product, first of all. But it's a top seller around the globe, and there's a reason for that, because we were all taught that lighter skin is better. In many countries, there were lighter skinned and European people who were encouraged to intermix with the native populations so that the population could get lighter over time, okay, and produce mixed or better children. So this is real, this is history. And so with all of this happening and impacting us for centuries, of course, you would feel that you are less than. Of course, I would feel that I'm less than. So all of this is to say that this is the good news. The good news is that you are not crazy. It was explicitly taught to you. And because it was explicitly taught to you, that means, one, you are not naturally inferior or naturally more unattractive because your skin is darker or because your hair is of a different texture, because your nose or whatever features you have. And two, that also means that you can be untaught. Okay, so this is the good news. This means that you have power and you have agency in the matter. Or now that you're working on unpacking the fact that this is history and this has gone on for centuries and you've been taught this, and you've also accepted the fact that you have power, one of the things that is really important to do is to surround yourself with people with positive images and positive representations of people that look like you. Okay, so just as though we as people of color, we've been indoctrinated to believe that we're not enough, now you got to do the work to fight back against that. And so one of the things, just understanding that white standards of beauty are everywhere in our media. And so, in really insidious ways. So, each different person of color group is going to appear differently, but you might not see examples, or you might barely see examples of yourself represented in mainstream media. And for me as a Black woman, I see more examples of myself. But one of the things that I see is I'll see Black women who have straight hair, and there's no knock to that, but for me as a Black woman, the hair thing is a massive, massive trigger. I've been taught, it's been indoctrinated in me that there's something wrong with my natural hair. So to see Black women who have natural hair is a really massive thing that you don't see as much of. Now, so we are starting to see more and more diverse representations of people of color in mainstream media in the United States. But the other good news is that with the internet and with cable TV, there's so many more different representations, and there's more and more opportunities for you to find yourself in other non-mainstream ways. Okay, so if you don't see yourself represented in the way that you want to, look online, join different communities, go and find people in person, because it's so important to be surrounded by people who look like you, because it normalizes you and your features and your qualities and what makes you uniquely beautiful. So that's the first thing. And also, if you join a community, or if you find shows that represent you and represent your voice, it makes you feel normalized. It makes you feel like you're not um, that there's not something wrong with you, because there isn't. That there's not something really, that you're not all by yourself and isolated, because you're not. Okay. And again, if you join different communities like online groups, or Facebook groups or what have you, or if you go in person and join different cultural groups, it gives you also a supportive environment to speak to uh, these feelings when you feel inferior or when you feel less than. So one example is that, if you read my blog, it's posted below. I talk about how my daughter, as a young Black woman, she's only going on 3. And while she was 2, she started to express an opinion about herself where she did not like her hair, where she wanted straight hair like the Disney princesses that she loves so much. And even though we're in a household full of beautiful Black people, she was showing self-hate at that tender age. And so what that tells me is that this stuff starts to happen very early, and we have to be very intentional about the messages that we send ourselves. And so with our daughter, we're sending her to school with backpacks and things that have little brown-skinned girls on them, so she can start to normalize and feel and see. And we also have them in our house too, so that way she can start to see that she is normal and that she is beautiful and her looks are normal and beautiful. Finally, the last tip that I want to leave you with is that if you are really in a place where you're struggling and your self worth is really low, or your self esteem is really low, go seek help and support in therapy or in counseling, and do your best to find someone who looks like you or who might understand where you're coming from. And just to give you some personal background on me, that's how I started. I'm somebody who struggled off and on with self-esteem issues for much of my life, and I didn't think that um, my um, that my identity as a Black woman, I didn't understand how important a factor all of that was in my low self worth and low self esteem. And it wasn't until I got therapy in 2010 that I really started to unpack some of these complex issues. Now, was it my identity as a Black woman solely? No, but a lot of it, yes, and in deeper ways than I even realized. Like from the time I was a child, and being spoon fed these images of who was beautiful and who was not, who had the abilities and who didn't. And so it naturally made me feel as though I was less than. And so I operated for years from that framework. So if you really feel like your whole framework and mentality needs to be changed, seek help, because there's no shame in it. And in fact, what it did is it actually helped me to unpack a lot of my own self hate and get on the right path towards self love, and then really being able to see these issues fully and see that, a lot of this wasn't my fault, and a lot of that, and that I had the power to change it. So, I felt isolated and I felt alone. And so if you're feeling any of those feelings, definitely, take the first step and go seek out help. There's no shame in it. And in fact, it can be a really healing and transformative life experience for you. It was for me. So, those are my just a couple of tips. I know that a YouTube video can't possibly uh, answer all of life's questions on centuries worth of oppression and self hate. But what it can do is hopefully help you to start the conversation within yourself, and just normalize these issues for you, that you're not alone, and that if you were ever feeling less than because of the color of your skin, or because you're a marginalized group in our society, then just understand that you are part of a community of people that have also felt the same way. Okay? And that you do have power and you have more agency than you think you do. Okay? So, with that, I'm going to leave you, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Remember, you're beauty and you are worthy.